What does self-care look like for you?
Yeah. So I love definitions of things. And I think because there's so many different ways to look at self-care, I have one definition I really hold on to. I think self-care is doing what you need to do to show up as your favorite version of yourself. I like to keep it really big. That includes a lot of things. And for me, self-care in my current state means doing less. For me to show up as close as I can to my favorite version of myself at this energy level is doing less.
Hey, welcome back to Normalize the Conversation. Today, I am so excited for today's guest. I am here with Michelle Goodloe, author, licensed social worker, and just all around amazing human. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we dive in, I want to check in. How are you really?
First of all, super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I know our conversation is going to be awesome. And to answer your question, how am I really? I'm super tired. And sometimes that's really hard for me to say out loud and to admit, even now. But that is honestly how I feel. My energy is a little bit lower than usual.
Thank you for being so honest. I think it's so hard to admit that we're not like perfect and good all the time, especially as advocates, especially as someone kind of boosting self-care and really helping people. It can be so hard to admit that sometimes I'm tired too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So, when you are feeling tired, when you're starting to feel this way, what does self-care look like for you?
Yeah. So I love definitions of things. And I think because there's so many different ways to look at self-care, I have one definition I really hold on to. I think self-care is doing what you need to do to show up as your favorite version of yourself. I like to keep it really big. That includes a lot of things. And for me, self-care in my current state means doing less. For me to show up as close as I can to my favorite version of myself at this energy level is doing less. So, for example, today I took a look at my schedule and I tried to see where is more space? Is there any way I can give myself more space to not do the things? Can I take something off my task list? Can I plan to do something later? Not avoid, but plan. Is there a way I can ask for help for something? So I've asked my husband for help, asked my mom for help. It's about releasing for me and creating that space for me to breathe a little bit easier. And it's not the best time. And we'll probably talk about this more. Today is not the best time to overachieve or overextend because my energy isn't there. Sometimes you do have the energy to do that, but it's okay if you don't. So a lot of giving myself permission to relax and rest.
Permission to relax and rest. Wow. It is so hard to want to give yourself permission to just rest and know that it's okay to move something off my schedule. I know for me, I'm one of those overachievers as well. It has to be producing. That was taught that your worth is tied to how much you can produce and how much you can achieve in your success.
Yeah,
And it can be so hard to just sit back and say, I deserve to rest today. And I don't feel ashamed for resting.
that's right. That's right. And that's part of why I started my personal brand of G Michelle Wellness is I am a professional helper. Gosh, so many different titles here. I'm an eldest sister, eldest child. I'm a new mom. I'm an 8-month-old mom. I have so many roles where I have to give a lot of myself. And I needed a space. I know I was looking for a space that really spoke to me, that was like, hey, I love doing things for other people. I love helping, but I'm also exhausted. Like I am very much burnt out in the different roles that I'm filling. And I didn't see exactly what I needed. And so sometimes that's the best time to create. And so I started G Michelle, just really focusing on talking to folks who struggle with taking care of themselves. They are experts at taking care of others. They know how they could name other people's needs off the back of their hand. But when it comes to themselves, when the spotlight of self care is on them, they either don't know what they need or they struggle to take care of their own needs and end up at the bottom of their priorities. Those are my people.
I love that. It's so easy to want to take care of others. I think women in general, we're kind of taught to be those caretakers. That's the role that we've been given. And it can be so hard to make time to take care of ourselves or recognize that it's okay to take care of ourselves. So when you start working with these people, how do you help them recognize that it's okay for me to take a break and focus on me today?
Oh, yeah. Well, the very first thing I like to ask folks is, do you know what your needs are? And I don't mean that to put anybody on the spot, but it's an important question to ask before you even jump into a self care practice. Because I see some folks do it backwards, like, oh my gosh, I need to start yoga, or oh my gosh, I need to eat healthier. And it's like, wait a minute, before we add even one more thing to your to do list, because I know it's already full, let's kind of start at the beginning of what is it that you need? In what areas do you feel the most stressed or the most burnt out or the most stretched? Then that's actually a place where we can identify your needs. Because when we have the definition of self-care, I like to narrow it down and have a definition for a self-care practice. And it's 3 different parts. It means identifying and addressing your needs in a routine, regular way. So discovering what your needs are by identifying them, then actually addressing those needs with self-care practices, habits, and routines, and then keeping that cycle going of identifying and addressing your needs on a regular basis. You need all 3 parts to show up as your favorite version of yourself.
100% addressing your needs, identifying your needs. I mean, when it comes to self-care, I can speak on behalf of myself and those around me. A lot of our information would come from social media because we're not really taught it in school. Our parents didn't grow up learning about it, so they don't necessarily know how to have these conversations with us. And unfortunately, on TikTok, you see self-care as, going to yoga or putting on a face mask or going shopping, taking a me day. But what is your specific need and how can you do it with intention so that it does benefit you? I mean, people don't talk about that enough. So I love that you are taking that approach.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned those examples because everybody's self-care looks different. And because we're still living within a culture that really struggles to take care of themselves, I like to say, before we jump into even judging what other people are doing for self-care, let's first just acknowledge that people are trying. I mean, if you're getting your scheduled manicures, if you're having a retail therapy date, and you're within your limits and your budgets, go for it. If that's what you know, go for it. But then when you're ready to learn more, this is where self-awareness comes in and learning about your needs comes in. In my book, The Self-Care Investment, I actually go over 8 different types of self-care. And I consider like manicures and fun stuff like that to be personal self-care. That's how you take care of your relationship with yourself, how you love on yourself, you treat yourself, you celebrate yourself. But there's actually several different types of ways you can take care of yourself, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, professionally. The list goes on and on. So I'd like to say it's okay if that's what you're doing, that's all you know. If you're ready to do something more, then that's time for the education.
I completely agree. It's so important to just start somewhere. And then to hopefully get to a point of self-awareness where you can recognize that intention's important, identifying how it's supporting you and how it's helping you and how other things can help you and be a benefit into your life is so important. And although it's great to start somewhere, don't sell yourself short in the fact that that's all you can do. We can continuously learn. And that's what I love about what you're doing is you're giving us that opportunity to learn more about ourselves, learn more about what opportunities are available for ourselves. But talking about those 8 different forms of self-care, can you tell us what those are?
Yes, I'm going to try my best to say all of them because sometimes I forget 1 or 2. So there's physical self-care. And would you like me to share the definitions?
Yes, please.
Okay, you got it. So physical self-care is the practice of taking care of your physical being and your physical health. Then there's emotional self care. That's the practice of taking care of your mental well being, your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions, your responses. Okay. Then there's spiritual self care. That means taking care of your spiritual identity if that's important to you. So, your faith, if that's your energy, if that's astrology, whatever spirituality means to you, it means putting those routines in place to take care of that spiritual identity. For social self care, I split it up into two different parts. The first part is first recognizing the roles that you hold and how you're feeling about them. So, kind of like how I listed them at the beginning, being an eldest daughter, being a new mom, being a spouse, right? I check in on myself in those different social roles and say, well, has it been stressful to be a mom? The answer is yes. Has my marriage been giving me some joy? Absolutely. It's checking in on those roles. The second part of social self care is checking in on how you receive energy socially. So this means checking in if you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, or somewhere in between. I fit in the somewhere in between space because I recharge a lot being alone, but I really do get a lot out of my intimate connections with my loved ones. So that's social self-care. I like to talk about intellectual self-care with adults. With children or folks who are minors, this part of you actually gets stimulated very regularly because you're typically in an academic program. For adults, it's not always that we're getting stimulated in that way intellectually. Sometimes we're overstimulated with a lot of critical thinking in the things that we do, or understimulated, right? Not getting enough learning potential. So I like to say intellectual self-care is the practice of taking care of your ability to learn, because we have got to have that strength as we're growing and changing. Then we have professional self-care. This one's pretty tricky and comes up a lot in the work that I do with the people I do. Professional self-care is taking care of this really interesting space between what you do for work full-time and the rest of your life. I like to say that space in between, it includes the boundaries that you need to have in place to take care of your work self. And again, I like to say the rest of your life. Your job is only one part of your life. So that's professional self-care, taking care of the boundaries, the practices that you need to maintain those two different parts of your life. Then we have financial self-care. Financial self-care is taking care of your ability to have economic stability. I like to say financial self-care has a whole lot to do with privilege, has a lot to do with access, resources, and honestly, your own knowledge and experience and education with finances in general. This is a tricky one. It's not a fun one for a lot of folks, right? But it means really checking in. Do you have, and sometimes financial self-care is the most important self-care for folks. While it might be nice to do this and that, if you're having any type of stressful feelings around your finances, your income, housing, budgeting, right? Having access or understanding of your benefits, right? Looking for employment. We know that looking for a job is a job. So financial self-care is the focus of taking care of your ability to have economic stability. And finally, we have personal self-care. This is taking care of your relationship with yourself. And personal self-care can encompass all the other types of self-care, but I thought it needed its own type. And I like to say one of the best places to start with your personal self-care is, how do you speak to yourself? Like, what is your internal dialogue like, right? So are you speaking to yourself with kindness? Are you a little critical? Or do you notice there's like no relationship with self? There's a disconnect? Then this may be a type of self-care that you focus on. So again, that's just scratching the surface. There's other types of self-care for sure, but I find that these 8 are really important to really start a well-rounded self-care practice.
Right off the bat, I can tell you I identified a need in every single area. And I think reflecting back, if I think about maybe an hour ago, I would have said that, oh, my self-care need is sleep. And that's where I would have drawn the line. And hearing you break it down into all the different levels, I mean, my exhaustion, my overwhelmness, just all these kind of intrusive thoughts coming and going, racing thoughts, it can really be broken down into all the different areas. And by
Mhm.
addressing one, that may be great, but it would definitely not address that exhaustion. Do you find that, I said that a lot. Do you find within what we need, it does target all these different areas?
I do. I do. I think that we're complex human beings and each of us have different needs. And one thing I think is so important to explore and honestly normalize is that your needs can change. Like you can outgrow practices. You may have different needs as you get older or take on a new position or grow into a new role or start a new relationship or move. I think it's important when it comes to self care that you focus on honestly those three steps of that self care practice. You need to regularly identify what your needs are and address them, and then repeat. Do it in a repetitive way because, again, your needs will change. And if we're not aware of how our needs change, then we're not able to truly take care of ourselves the way we need to.
100%. Our needs are always changing. It is so important to check in with ourselves. Some weeks we may be feeling more exhausted and overwhelmed. Some weeks we may be feeling more stressed or getting that good amount of sleep. We don't understand where that stress is coming from. Some weeks we might feel just really good. And we really just need more of that personal self care. And if we're not checking in, we're really not able to identify what's going to help us in this present moment and what we're going through. How often do you check in with yourself?
Honestly, daily, sometimes more than once a day. And it's not something that's like incredibly, dramatic or time consuming. But sometimes, especially before I do my physical self care practice, while I'm stretching and listening to music, I'll just be like, okay, what does this feel? Do I feel some tension here? Am I feeling some stress? It's just a quick body scan of how I'm doing. And I notice that really helps me set the tone for the day. It doesn't make my day perfect, but it makes me aware of what my needs are. And so if I can check in on those needs, it's like, all right, do just like today, do I need to make some adjustments in my schedule so I can rest more? I'll definitely disclose since becoming a parent, man, this was tough for me to recognize, but I need so much more sleep. Like if I would double the amount of sleep that I'm getting. And honestly, I felt really guilty for needing so much rest. I felt because of the things that I have to work through with my emotional self care and my history, I have to unlearn that needing rest is bad, especially needing more rest is bad. And it's sleep, I think, is one of the number one self care needs a lot of busy professional caring people have, but it's really hard to actually get it the way you need it. So it's okay if that's the self-care need that you're focusing on. Okay. If you're listening, I'm talking to you. It's okay for us to get that rest and to repeatedly tell ourselves, oh, it's okay to rest. It's okay that your body needs rest.
So true. I mean, like you said, feeling guilty for needing rest can be so difficult. Oh, my dog is hiccuping. That's so I'm sorry for that sound in the background.
No problem.
So cute. Okay. So it can be so hard to recognize that it's okay to rest. It's okay if we can't handle every single thing on our plate right now, that we need to just step back and recharge. How do you remind yourself that that's okay?
How I remind myself by first just noticing if I'm having those guilty thoughts. Again, I swear I'm a broken record here, but it's the self awareness. If I find myself being too hard on myself, if I find that I'm being really critical or having that negative self talk, first of all, I got to be aware of it. And then I have to go, wait a minute, Michelle, what's going on with this inner dialogue? My inner self critic's name is Sasha. Sasha is very sassy and she always has something smart to say, something spicy to say. So I have to say, Sasha, you gotta relax, girl. You gotta relax. We didn't get a lot of sleep last night. That's why we're showing up like this. Give us a break. Okay. That is my inner dialogue. I know somebody's listening going, Michelle, what? But I'm telling you, for me to have that kind of self talk is so important for my mental health. Otherwise, I'm talking to myself in a really critical and negative way that has zero compassion. And that's not helpful for me.
I really relate to that. That conversation within my head telling me that I'm wrong to need rest, that I'm lazy, that I'm not going to achieve enough, and that I'm letting people down. I'm letting myself down. I'm not living up to the potential. I have all these opportunities. How can I kind of just push them aside and not focus on them and utilize them to every piece of my ability? That can be so difficult to recognize that conversation is happening, and it is so destructive, and getting in there and saying no. I, Resting is great. It's how I'm going to live up to all this potential, how I'm going to utilize all the opportunities and privilege I've been given to be able to be my best and show up for myself and show up for others.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That conversation in our head is so important. I love how you talked about that self-talk. For you, when that self-talk is really coming, you're trying to reframe those thoughts. What do you think is the most important kind of step that you take?
Again, broken record time, being aware of when the thoughts are happening. And again, this has been part of my therapeutic journey for my mental health care, is what triggers those thoughts to start happening. Right. And again, I'm working with a licensed professional in that. So if you're listening to this and going, man, that sounds interesting, that's definitely a place to start, is working with a licensed mental health professional to really get in there on what the triggers are. But for me, it was identifying what some of those triggers are, and then having some more compassion filled, strength based filled approaches to talking to myself. And it takes work. And let me go ahead and throw this out there too, since we're talking about it. There's this really big myth or misunderstanding that self-care is only about relaxing and only about having fun. I'm here to tell you that is just not true, not in the way that I see self-care. If we go back to that definition, self-care is about doing what you need to do to show up as your favorite version of yourself. And that means doing the hard stuff. Sometimes that means doing the uncomfortable stuff, or the stuff that you might be dreading doing or avoiding doing or ignoring doing, like going to therapy or setting those boundaries, or actually recognizing what your priorities are and knowing the difference between what's urgent and what's important. Self-care is not all about having fun and relaxing.
Self-care is work, and it's such important but difficult work.
Mhm.
Speaking of therapy, today my therapist looked at me and said, what's more important than getting an A? What's more important than being successful? And I was like, nothing. And she's like, what about sleep? What about loving yourself? What about making time to care for yourself? And I was like, wow, I sounded terrible saying that nothing was more important than it, because that's not true. There are so many things that are more important than being this version of what you're expected to be.
Mhm.
And that's hard to recognize and start working toward.
It is. I'm so glad your therapist shared that, because I think a lot of us, again, I'm going to throw out some terms here that really resonate to why it's so hard to practice self-care. For a lot of us living in the Western part of the world, where there's a really big focus on patriarchy and capitalism, it can be incredibly difficult for people, especially people who identify as female, to create space for themselves to reprioritize their lives. There's systemic and systematic issues that really prevent us sometimes from being able to just say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go over here and take a nap. There's a lot of that here that I also like to address in my work too. Even though it's self-care, there really needs to be a community approach to helping everybody get the rest that they need, have the peacefulness, the energy. We definitely want to see some bigger changes there, for sure.
I completely agree. And that is the perfect segue into your book, Own Your Magic. You're making those resources available. Can you tell us more about that book?
Absolutely. I Own My Magic is self-talk for Black women. And not just any self-talk, but encouraging, strength-based, and culturally affirming self-talk. as a Black woman myself, I think that we just can't have enough resources just for Black women. And I wanted to do my part in sharing a resource I thought was helpful. What's different about this book is I share my own personal struggles about moving through self-care and my self-care journey as a Black woman. I talk about how rest is restorative and what does it actually mean to care for your health physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And how do microaggressions fit into self-care? What does it mean to code switch? I really like to use some of those different terms because it very much relates to and connects with how Black women really struggle to practice self-care and how it's not our fault as individuals.
I absolutely love that. I'm currently a psych student, and in class last night, so excited, doing my master's, we were talking about sociocultural factors and how that can be at play in someone's mental health and why it can be so difficult for them to reach out for help or to admit that they need help. And that was really huge for me to learn how, based on your upbringing, based on your culture, based on your past, your history, your ancestral history, how all those factors come at play and can impact where you are today and your desire when kind of, I don't know if the desire is the right word, but your want to reach out for help because there's this idea that you're weak, that you can't do that. Or society's telling you that that didn't happen specifically to you, so that's not affecting you, and to kind of get over it. And they're not paying attention to what needs have not been addressed for so long. And that's what I really admire about you and your book is you're giving people that chance. You're addressing those factors that we often overlook.
Yeah. It's tough to do. It took some self-reflection and really some processing on my own end to even get to the place to share my story. Fighting through, again, that feeling of guilt that kind of looms over and shame around my own self-care experiences. I was like, wait a minute though. I think this could be helpful to read for someone to actually see what it's like for a Black girl to consider her hair as part of self-care, to notice and survive aggressions, whether they be macro or micro, from white folks or folks with privilege and power. I think that when it comes to self-care for Black women, it's important to recognize those cultural features. And it's funny, I've been in a few interviews about I Own My Magic, and sometimes I'll be asked by a host, well, how does this book benefit everybody? And I'm like, well, let me talk to you, because this book's focus is really for Black women. And sure, there's things in there that can benefit all people, but we cannot forget the focus here is really supporting and uplifting Black women. That a lot of the self-care topics that show up online, on social media, in some mainstream resources are already centered towards people who fit within the margins. I Own My Magic is for Black women, specifically African-American women, women of the African diaspora, because we need more resources that address our issues.
That is completely true. And it is so important to recognize that resources are not often available and made specifically for different demographics. They're often made for kind of the demographic like me. And it can be so frustrating when we don't realize it. And for those listening who may not identify as a Black female, buy that book and give it to someone else who does, someone who needs it. If you are in the position to be able to afford the book and buy the book, and you have friends or loved ones or just someone in your network and community who you think could benefit from it, please take that approach. Just because it's not made for you specifically does not mean that you cannot buy it and give it to someone who needs it. I really want to throw that out there.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it. And thank you for doing it in that way, because child, we do not want folks just buying the book and giving it to random Black people. We don't need that either. Okay. If you have a relationship with a Black woman and think this could be beneficial, by all means.
Exactly. It is, you are just absolutely amazing. And the book, the work that you're doing, you have so many different books. Tell us a little bit about your other books as well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Fran. I also have My very first guided journal is called Self Explore, Self Restore. If you have been really curious about the self awareness piece that we've mentioned multiple times today, this is the perfect place to start. I created this journal just for folks who want to get to know their needs more. So they wanted to explore those needs and restore those needs. There's a different journaling prompt on every page. There's opportunities to journal in the traditional sense, draw, create lists. I mean, there's a lot of variety in this particular journal. So if you're in the beginning of your journey or you're not sure what your needs are, that's what that's created for. My other book is called The Self-Care Investment. If you're kind of familiar with self-care, but you feel like it's not been helpful to you, or it's not well-rounded, or you're really struggling to commit to it, that's exactly what this workbook is for. Because just like we talked about today, I go over all different types of self-care, but then there's a chapter dedicated to each type for you to learn a little bit deeper. There's activities, there's all kinds of templates and good stuff in there for you to really develop a well-rounded self-care practice you can commit to. So all of these resources are actually all available on Amazon, and on my website, gmichelle.com, you can learn even more about each of them.
Thank you so much for sharing and creating these incredible resources. I'm a huge fan of workbooks and being guided to figure out what works for you. I think that books are amazing. I think that hearing other people's stories are amazing. But there's something very special about taking someone else's story, listening to it, learning from it, and being able to make it your own and being able to build that guide that you need for yourself and follow that guide and build it that you need. I don't know if I'm speaking right now.
You are. I got you. Yeah.
Michelle, you have been an absolute blessing today. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience?
I just want to say thank you for creating this space. Just like I predicted, this is an amazing conversation, and you are a wonderful host. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. If folks are interested in staying connected, I have a free email list where I share all kinds of self-care tips, reminders, and my email list always gets the first of whenever I'm doing something different or new. So you can go to gmichelle.com, and that's G as in good, Michelle with 2 L's.com, sign up for the email list, and we can stay connected together.